Hey there, welcome to today's episode of pianoTV. I'm Allysia, your host, and I have a question that I wanted to share with you today and discuss, sent in by Brett, who asked probably a really long time ago. Hopefully, won't answer my burning question until the next webinar. So I'm answering it on a video. The question being, when is it time to move up an RCM level? Or ABRSM or whatever, if you're participating in any sort of music school on your own, independently, or if you're working with a music teacher, or even if you're just kind of moving up through the grade levels, but you're not really doing exams or anything like that. When is it time to move to the next level? How do you know when you've passed or when you're ready to move on? So backing this up, when I used to teach studio lessons, we would have a term from September to June. Actually, it'd be a couple terms. But that would be the duration of a grade level. In a really like average kind of typical case. You'd start a grade in September and then you'd finish up that grade in June, usually in conjunction with recitals and exams and stuff like that. And then in the fall, you'd start a brand new grade. So bingo bango, you got one grade per year. So that was our kind of general trajectory. It depends though, because what do you do? And forgive the construction noise if you can hear it. There's lots of construction happening outside. But what do you do if you are a student who's maybe done like the 9 months of work on a grade level and you're really struggling with some of your pieces? Or on the other side of it, what if you've done your 9 months of grade level work, but you're like flying ahead and everything's really easy? What do you do then? There's no easy answers to these questions, but we'll discuss them a little bit in turn. So first, let's back up and talk a little bit about the grades. Not too much. I've talked about them at length on this channel. Roughly, there are 8 grades. Some music schools have preparatory grades, beginner grades that are pre-grade 1, and some schools go past grade 8, where there's, in the RCM, say, grade 9, 10. Most schools have diploma levels beyond that as well. But instead of thinking of each individual grade as a totally kind of isolated, independent unit, equal in value, I think it's more useful to consider the broad categories of beginner, intermediate, and advanced. So the beginner category would be everything from Prep A to about grade 2. And then you would kind of graduate into the next level, which is intermediate. Intermediate would be roughly from grade 3 to 7, and then advanced would be everything grade 8 and onward. Now, the reason I find it helpful to think in terms of these categories when you're deciding whether or not to move up a grade level is because I'm much more likely to move a student up to the next level if they are maybe struggling a little bit, if it's, say, from Prep A to B, or grade 1 to 2 even, because these are all within the beginner umbrella. And it's much more important to not hold someone back when they're in those phases. So it depends how struggling they are. I mean, there's a difference between, maybe kind of like, scraping by but making it versus doesn't get anything, can't even do really basic stuff with notes and rhythm. That would be a pretty rare situation for someone who's practicing, though. I think the vast majority of people that I've taught who actually put in some time and effort don't usually run into that problem. But grade A, or Prep A to B, B to 1, 1 to 2, I can't even think of a time where I might have held someone back from those transition points. But it is a little bit different when you're moving from the beginner level to the intermediate level, because all of a sudden you're entering somewhat of a paradigm shift. The intermediate level it basically relies on a solid foundation. So by the time you're getting into grade 3, you're learning your first sonatinas and stuff like that. It kind of doesn't work unless you have a really decent foundation with rhythm, with note reading, just some basic theory concepts. If those aren't in place, then everything grade 3 onward is going to be hard. It's going to be a struggle. I mean, it's already difficult for people who are kind of like getting the concepts as they go. So the transition from 2 to 3, I might hesitate on moving someone up that level if they're still struggling with basic concepts, because that's kind of the point where it's like, okay, they're not going to have a good time at this next grade level if we don't repair some pretty major problems. Because ultimately, I expect someone who's completing the beginner level to have the basics down. You might not be the best note reader of all time, or you might not be like the fastest rhythm reader, but you can do it. You can count. You can identify a note. You're pretty okay at it in simple pieces. That's really the foundation that needs to be in place. That being in mind, once I kind of figured that out, just on my journey, my meandering journey as a teacher, I started paying a little bit more attention to the way that I taught, especially in grade 1 and 2, to make sure that that transition would actually be bridged without having to hold someone back. Because I really don't like holding people back. I really, really don't like, as adults, we have a tendency towards perfectionism. So there can be this sense of, okay, I'm not like doing my grade 1 pieces perfectly. I'm not doing the hardest grade 1 piece that I can find perfectly. Therefore, I'm not ready to move on. That is so far from the truth. If you're playing average difficulty grade 1 pieces pretty well, like, 80 or 90% accurate of what you think the piece could be if played by someone who's been playing for a decade or more, then you're doing really good. There's nothing to worry about. So I think part of it also is checking that perfectionism at the door a little bit. But anyway, my bigger point is that, if you're moving then from grade 3 to 4, 4 to 5, 5 to 6, I'm very unlikely to hold someone back because these are less big leaps and more just little steps. You're not entering like this whole new universe going from grade 5 to 6, but you are sort of entering a whole new universe when you go from 7 to 8. And especially, even though this is within the advanced category, the step from grade 8 to grade 9 is another quite cosmic leap, and so is the transition from 9 to 10. So there's certain, let's call them like junctions in the journey that I wouldn't skip over. But it's not so much to do with the individual grade level. Just to return to our discussion on intermediate level and that transition, just to clarify also, the intermediate level, it's not so much that you're being introduced to newer, more complicated rhythms, because by the time you're at a grade 3 level, you've pretty much done all the rhythms. Of course, things can get more difficult, but they get more difficult in terms of density. I think that's the one thing to keep in mind. The notes themselves get more dense, and the rhythms themselves get more dense. The music starts looking a little bit more frightening. It looks a little more tightly packed. There's less space on the page because there's more notes just being pressed, oftentimes faster too. But the density is the thing that becomes really problematic. This is the thing, if you've ever picked up a piece of music and you're like, oh, I could probably learn this. It's no big deal. You're kind of a beginner, but you can sort of read music. And then you end up, what you pick is like a grade 8 piece. It's really tough. It doesn't look tough, but it's super tough. It's more to do with like how packed the notes are on a page. So if you see lots of half notes and the rhythm looks easy, you're like, okay, I could do that. Because there's not like notes everywhere. But then if you look at how they're stacked, there's like a lot of notes happening at the same time. More advanced pieces just tend to be like there's more in them, right? I guess that probably makes logical sense. But if you're at a grade 2 level and you're still struggling with basic concepts of counting, I'm not saying you have to be a counting master going into grade 3, but if you don't know how to count an 8th note, if you don't know how to count a 16th note, if you don't know how to count in 6/8 time, if you don't know how to count a dotted note or a dotted 8th note with a 16th note pair or things, those are the rhythms that I would expect someone to know. And if they didn't have a good grasp on that going into grade 3, then I would consider doing some remedial work with them and really focusing on those concepts. The same is true with reading music. Can you pretty quickly identify a C or an E or an F? Are you generally, when you're reading music, like accurate? Maybe there's a wrong note here or there, but overall you're like pretty good at getting the right notes. These are the kind of things that you don't want to cross over into the intermediate level. When you start working on sonatinas and stuff like that, the thing about them is that they're pretty fatiguing to play. And if they're also really fatiguing to learn mentally because you just haven't worked out some of the basics yet, there's a bigger risk that you're just going to get frustrated and put it away, and you're going to have to spend a disproportionate amount of practice time just working over some fundamentals that probably should have been better learned in the first couple, like 2 to 3 years of your piano studies. There is another side though. We've been pretty much focused on when to hold someone back, or what do you do if someone's struggling with the level that they're at. But what about the student who just blasts ahead really quickly? The interesting thing about this is that you can often get this within the same person. You can have one year someone's, moving slow, kind of struggling. The next year they're like a rocket ship into outer space. It's really kind of magical to observe and underlines the non-linear nature of learning piano. But what do you do in these situations? Well, I skip grades. I have like skipped grades with abandon on both myself and with other students, keeping some basic things in mind similar to what we've already talked about. If you are a grade 1 student and you're like just absolutely crushing it, you can tackle the hard pieces with no problem. You don't have to practice them too long. The reading's easy, the rhythm's easy. You could probably skip ahead to grade 3. If you're a grade 6 student and you're just like, you just got it. You're ready for more complex, advanced material like Chopin and stuff. Skip grade 7, go to grade 8. I think I skipped I skipped grade 6 and 7, but that's because I took a few years off of piano. I came back and I finished. I did 8, 9, and 10, but I skipped 6 and 7. I think I also skipped 4. I might have even skipped 2. So I think if I'm looking at the like my RCM exam history, it's something like 1, 2, 5 or 1, 3, 5, something like that. 1, 3, 5, 8, 9, 10. There's a lot of holes in it, and those gaps aren't because I wasn't moving super fast, but those were I just didn't do RCM exams for one reason or another. Probably still played some of the music, but you don't need to do exams at all, but B, you don't need to do literally every single grade, especially if you're really kind of accelerating in a way where you're more than capable of tackling the challenges that lie ahead. The cautionary note that I would sound is I wouldn't skip anything past grade 7. If you're really going for the more complex stuff, I would do 8, 9, 10, and the diploma levels past that. Without skipping grade 10, never do that. It would make no sense, just because things get exponentially more difficult at that level. As well, I probably wouldn't skip a grade right around the transition point. So if you're jumping from from say grade 2 to 4, that would be a little bit more of a challenging jump, I think, just because you're already kind of entering a new universe when you get into the intermediate level. To skip over the beginner grade of the intermediate level could cause you some problems. So this means that the key junctures would be prep A. You don't want to skip the beginning stage. Grade 3, you don't want to skip the beginning of the intermediate stage. And about grade 7 with the ABRSM or 8 with the RCM. So those are the grades that you absolutely, I would strongly recommend not skipping if you can avoid it. Otherwise, you are allowed to jump ahead if you're ready. I think it's more common for people to actually, that's not true. I would say it's probably equally common for people to hold themselves back a little bit because they think they need to do like every single step in sequence. But again, equally common is someone who's overly ambitious and thinks that they can get into the grade 8 material right away with very little groundwork laid. So just some things to think about in that regard. Okay, so more practically, when do you know you're ready to move on from a grade level? The biggest thing that I would watch out for where you can kind of feel like you're ready to move on is how well are you able to learn a piece at that level, like an average piece. If you're in grade 1 and you pick up, I don't know, just trying to come up with a random piece of music in grade 1, like the burlesque in G, da 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 da. That would be what I'd consider like a flagstone piece of the grade. How well would you be able to learn that? How much of a struggle is that? If you learn it, how long does it take you? How long does it take you to get it up to speed? Are you able to do it with the correct articulations, like getting the phrase lifts where they belong and stuff like that? Ask yourself those questions. I think what would be pretty standard for a piece like that, probably like to get really good at, to get an exam worthy performance where it's like pretty well done, would be 3 to 5 hours of effort, pretty average. And I think most students at a grade 1 level, if you've kind of finished the level, you should be able to get all the detail work. You should be able to get all the phrasing right. You should be able to get like a relatively detached left hand. You should be able to get some dynamics in there and have accurate counting and all those things. So just as an example, I would recommend learning somewhere in the ballpark of 10 pieces per grade level. Not 10 pieces mastered. I think that would be a little intense. And I would recommend doing more than 10 if you can. In my courses, I usually do somewhere in the ballpark of 3 pieces a month, or 4 pieces a month. Every now and then we have a little gap, but it's usually roughly at the pace of a piece a week in the beginner levels. It obviously slows down once you get a little bit in the higher levels. But that's a lot of music, right? So I wouldn't expect a normal person, like in that September to June timeline, that 9-month timeline, to become like a master of 10 pieces. Cool if you do, though. Maybe a master of 5 pieces. That'd be really awesome. Basically, an exam repertoire's worth of pieces you could master. But a lot of those other pieces that you learn, the other 10, again, I say minimum 10, but I think 20 is even better. Probably half of those are going to be, like 60 or 70% learned. Like you did okay with them. You kind of got the gist. Maybe there's some gaps. Maybe you didn't get all the way through. Maybe it's slow. But you sort of extracted the juice out of it. And then another handful of pieces would probably be at that like 80% level. They're pretty good. You've pretty well learned them, but they're maybe not quite performance ready. And then another smaller handful of pieces that are in fact performable. I would approach each grade, if you're self-teaching, in that way, because I feel like that gives enough variety of reading music and notes and stuff like that you'll be able to move on to the next level without having missed anything that might be kind of important. Because I think what people do all too often is only learn like 5 pieces in total in the whole grade and spend like, half a year or more on just that. And you run the risk when you do that of just missing out on opportunities to develop your sight reading skills, to develop your counting skills. All these things that are going to be really important. They are really important from the beginning, but they continue to kind of compound as you increase to the next grade and the next grade after that, and so on. So you want to make sure that you have enough diversity in what you're learning, even if it's imperfectly learned, that you're bringing enough skills forward with you that, when you get to grade 6, you're not totally overwhelmed by the complexity of, I don't know, like Grieg or Chopin or something like that. Anyway, those are the big thoughts that I wanted to share with you. Let me know if you have any ideas of your own. Hopefully this someone answers your question at least a little bit, or provides at least 10% more guidance on how to kind of evaluate your own progress, the things that I look for as a piano teacher. Thank you so much for watching today's video. I really appreciate you joining and hanging out for this session. Take care, everyone.